on for signal optimization throughout this program. If you could just confirm that your phones are on mute throughout the presentation, as well as your cameras deactivated for signal optimization. Throughout, if you have comments or questions, please feel free to use the chat feature on this screen here with Teams. At the conclusion or throughout the presentation, Jacob will open up for questions and opportunities to address information provided from our panelists here today. My name is Renee Ligon. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Engagement with Team NEO. If I haven't met you yet, I'm looking forward to the next in-person meeting after COVID is over or socially distanced. But thank you for joining and being a part of our Fall Node program. And we're very excited about the program today. It is a continuation of our Aligning Opportunities and Misaligned Opportunities, a report that was published recently. And the goal of this conversation today, as we continue this conversation, when we look at the challenges presented to us with talent supply demand gaps in our region and the issues that can create if we don't get in front of that exponentially, this conversation to take a very prescriptive approach. We've analyzed and understand that we now have a problem. So let's talk about solutions that are currently in the market today that are addressing this from a very prescriptive nature, looking at talent and equity in our regions and looking at organizations that are currently serving in this space. The question that perhaps we ask ourselves today is, how might my organization or those that I partner with or those that I touch in my markets leverage or apply some of these creative solutions to solve this pressing issue? Jacob Duritsky, who has a great panel here to discuss this issue with us today. And I just want to introduce Jacob Duritsky. Many of you probably already know Jacob. He's a Vice President of Strategy and Research here with Team NEO. And at this time, Jacob, I invite you to our virtual lectern to cue us up with our panel and our presentation today.
Thanks so much, Renee, and good morning, everyone. And thank you so much to our panelists for being here. As Renee mentioned, I'm going to do 3 or 4 minutes, very quick overview of aligning opportunities and misaligned opportunities, just in case folks aren't familiar, though I suspect most on the call are, but really want to get into a panel discussion to talk about what some of our partners in the community are doing to address these critical issues. What you see here are the 2 covers. Aligning Opportunities is now in its 4th year. We're happy about that. We feel like the community has embraced it in many ways, but we felt the need to expand that conversation heading into 2020 as we thought about planning for our own initiatives, the way we think about DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion internally. We realized that figuring out how racial inequities are leading to some of these skills gaps is going to be increasingly important for the work and to inform the work that we do. So what you see to the right is misaligned opportunities, which has given us input into a conversation in a different way through some of the data. This is probably the best known page of aligning opportunities. I won't walk through it in detail. Many people refer to it as the red, yellow, green chart. But essentially what it has shown over time is that there tends to be a mismatch between employer demand and credentials being awarded by our universities 2 years, 4 years throughout Northeast Ohio. And it's particularly acute in IT, manufacturing, and healthcare. In any given year, we see a gap of somewhere in the 50 to 55,000 credentials relative to demand from employers. And that spurred a conversation about how those sectors of the economy and better alignment can start to drive our economy forward, moving forward, as we think about demographic headwinds, as we think about keeping more students here. But certainly as we think about racial inequities as a big component of that. Part of what misaligned opportunities has looked at is how those skills gaps specifically pertain to communities of color throughout North Ohio. Is a level setting tool for the discussion. When you think about Northeast Ohio broadly, and this varies county to county, minorities represent anywhere from 19 to 23% of all major metrics related to the economy: labor force, employment, total population. But what we'll see and what we'll hear from some of our panelists today is disproportionately, we're not seeing equal access to opportunities for the most in-demand occupations. I talked about manufacturing, healthcare, and computer and IT work, which you see here. Just to take a small slice of this, if you look at the yellow portion of the pie chart, for manufacturing, last year alone, only 10% of credentials went to African Americans relative to making up 13 to 15% of the population. Only 9% of healthcare credentials went to African Americans. Again, 13 to 15% of the population. And if you dig within that number, you see that even disproportionately, it tended to be on the lower end of the skill spectrum, not seeing RNs and above, seeing more STNA, more medical assisting. And then finally, in computer and IT work, only 5% of credentials last year went to African Americans. And this is a pervasive issue throughout all communities of color throughout Northeast Ohio. We are not seeing the relative share of workers in these communities getting those credentials, which can really help drive the community forward. And I think some of the efforts we're going to hear about today are steps in the right direction for solving some of these challenges. Just to drive that point home, I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but when you look at the top 20 in-demand occupations, those that pay good wages, have prospects for tremendous job openings going forward, what you see is that 19 of the top 20 in-demand occupations, regardless of sector throughout the region, they are underrepresented by communities of color, in some cases as low as 4 to 6% in total. So this is something we have to change. What we've said is if you take some key takeaways away from aligning opportunities and misaligned opportunities, it's clear that healthcare, IT, and manufacturing continue to drive this. Certainly, COVID is changing some of these trends in the short term, but we think long term, those are still the best bets for our region. But there's no silver bullet, and there are a lot of people doing a lot of great work, as we'll hear from our three panelists today, and that work can be leveraged and is scalable throughout Northeast Ohio. And if we think about that key component, which is equity, solving the equity crisis and just proportionately giving communities of color equal representation to some of these jobs could alone solve that talent gap in the 20 to 30% range. So it is critical to get right.
Jacob, we had a question
yes,
here.
Please.
I think it goes back to your chart where you had the eye chart. What is an other? Brad, if you want to take yourself off mute and maybe clarify exactly which slide you were looking at with that one.
The one before this slide right here. There you go.
Sure. Good question, Brad. So a part of the challenge, and particularly in computer and IT, is when you have foreign students or international students who are attending those programs, there are different reporting requirements for those. So you don't see sort of the traditional buckets filled out. So other tends to encompass any type of international student population you would see attending our colleges here in the region. Good question, though, and probably worth clarifying ahead of time going forward. So I appreciate that. That said, and Renee, with no other questions, it's my pleasure to introduce our three panelists. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through each individual bio, but we will share those with you when we send those slides out after the discussion. But joining us this morning are Goren Dillard, Director of Workforce Development at the Urban League of Greater Cleveland, Sue Lacy, President at ConxusNEO in Summit County, and Adam Snyder, who's the Managing Director and Sector Partnership Leader for the Workforce Connect effort at Magnet. I will stop sharing my slides and welcome each of our panelists this morning. Thanks so much for being here. I know all three of you are very familiar with aligning opportunities and misaligned opportunities, and certainly we work a great deal with each of you. But I'm not sure that this group in general has full familiarity with each of your efforts. So Goren, maybe starting with you and then going to Sue and Adam, could you spend 4 or 5 minutes just talking about yourself and the organization you represent, how some of your work aligns with what we just heard about in aligning opportunities and misaligned opportunities, and then how you plug more broadly into regional workforce development efforts?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jacob. I'd like to thank you and Renee on behalf of the Urban League of Greater Cleveland for this invitation to this conversation. And first, I want to say, with your reports, thank you for ripping the Band-Aid off, all right, because you've exposed facts that need to actually be addressed. The Urban League of Greater Cleveland, for those of you who aren't that familiar with our organization, we are an advocate for equitable representation, practices, and policy. just the very nature of the word league, connotes cooperation, alliances, groups coming together for a purpose. So collaboration is within our DNA, and our motto is basically empowering communities and changing lives. So we really look at community development, economic development, and workforce development as being one and the same, all in the same bucket. All right, so our focus programmatically with the Urban League is really three areas: education and youth, entrepreneurship, and workforce development. Now, for the sake of our conversation, we're going to focus on workforce development, and it's been an exciting whirlwind here. There's a lot of developments in this area, but the first thing I do want to emphasize is that job seekers with greater barriers tend to be our sweet spot for driving equity. And we want to create, equitable solutions that lead to sustainable income earning opportunities, wages, and opportunities for growth and development once you get in an organization. So career pathways and creating, talent pipelines is definitely a high priority. We're totally in agreement with the facts that Jacob has put together with his report, and it drives some concern for us as well. The top 20 in-demand jobs are highly underrepresented by people of color, particularly African Americans, and that is due to systemic barriers in issues that we are faced. Creating opportunities, for these underrepresented populations and communities is a high priority, and sometimes we just have to be a little bit more creative, innovative, and thinking outside the box. What I mean by that is there is a skills gap. There is evidence to that, but we have to meet our job seekers wherever they are. All right, so we're finding now that especially due to COVID, the scenario has changed dramatically. We are no longer serving just the chronically unemployed. Now we're serving, a wider range of job seekers who find themselves in a situation where they need help. A lot of these job seekers have some college, some skills. They're coming to the table with something to work with, but they need a little bit of help, navigating and position themselves, to transition into an area that may require, a specialized skill set to advance or succeed or transition into a new career. And there are barriers that, you face. So, as my dad used to always say, every problem has a solution. Sometimes you just have to think about it. And our approach is just that, giving this some real concentrated thought. If we were all working to condition ourselves physically, and you were listening to a personal trainer, the only way to build a little muscle is to apply a little stress. So we have to be comfortable sometimes with being uncomfortable. If we want to get to a situation where we're making a change that's impactful, all right, and that's necessary now, we actually have to a little bit differently. Our service delivery since COVID-19 has basically tripled. We've had to rely on technology platforms to, reach and engage with populations. And because of that, we're exploring new ways to, build out our capacity and use automation to our advantage to help those in need. So I guess what I really want to end up with saying, Jacob, is, we feel very, very fortunate to be partnering with, Team NEO in this effort, to really bring out the facts around, how you can get to, best practices for diversity, equity, and inclusion. All right. A lot of times it's not about, finger pointing, okay, but there is a need to have some accountability. There is a need to have, groups understand that, if you're working together, whether you're a team, alliance partner, what have you, you are actually affecting, your organization is impacting communities. So we have to address, ways to create more access and options for those who are, in populations that have been historically underrepresented. All right, and these are just facts that we have to deal with. All right, so let's not get confused over, equality and equity. Okay, equity is actually, creating a pathway, maybe some tools, diversity and inclusion. Okay, to create a level playing field where someone has opportunities to succeed at what they're doing. So with that said, I'm a big fan of the work that Jacob and Team NEO is doing. Sometimes I just feel like I'm, a fan and a groupie waiting for the next rock star performance.
Thanks, Goren. That's really helpful. And I think next question we're going to get to in a little bit is going to be really how we start thinking more deeply about some of those DEI issues and some of the very specific initiatives in place. But Sue, would love to ask you the same question for this group. If you could tell folks a little bit about ConxusNEO and the work you're doing. We've certainly worked with you as it relates to aligning ops and now misaligned ops for years now. And how you're engaging more broadly in regional workforce efforts and maybe the impact COVID has had on some of that work. You're muted, Sue.
There we go. Thanks, Jacob, and good morning, everyone. So our work at ConxusNEO is really focused on building the capacity and the performance of the talent ecosystem as a whole in Summit County. So we're not an organization that's set up to run programs like Goren's organization. Instead, we really take stock of all the organizations that are doing programming, all the education and training partners that are offering credentials and training within 5 essential functions to prepare young people and adults with the skills and the competencies that companies are telling us we need through reports like Aligning Opportunities. And those 5 areas, just so everyone knows, are awareness, exploration, development of relevant skills, connection between folks who have those skills and the companies that need them, and then upskilling, either internally to an organization or as community folks are displaced, unfortunately, under COVID, connecting them with access to upskilling opportunities with skills that are now relevant during COVID. So essentially, we're helping our community cultivate a high-performing talent supply chain is what it amounts to, supporting programs that deliver positive outcomes, making sure they have the resources they need to continue and scale up where appropriate, and identifying gaps within that system to be shored up, and in some cases by creating new initiatives or programs. And certainly the issues that Goren was referencing in terms of the barriers people face and the inequities in terms of representation and good paying jobs in our core industries are a good example of that. And in the end, we connect and align all of these efforts around shared purpose within aligned strategies and eventually shared measurement. So we did work with Jacob and his team over the last year or so to establish key performance indicators within each of those functions that I mentioned, to begin to track community-wide outcomes so that we know if we're moving the dial in ways that we all agree are important. And honestly, that's one area where COVID has impacted our ability to track certain outcomes that we had originally established as quickly and comprehensively as we had planned. There's so much disruption and uncertainty, out of school programming, experiential learning, our summer camps this past year are good examples of some of the things we had hoped to track. And of course, a lot of those things were either canceled or reconfigured in a virtual platform that we haven't been able to gather data on. And so, the other issue that, again, Goren, mentioned is that COVID obviously has disproportionately impacted people of color and communities of color as well. So a lot of the initiatives that we had launched within the Coordinated Economic Development Strategy here in Akron called Elevate Greater Akron, a collaborative between the city, county, and chamber, a lot of those efforts to reach and engage the Black community with information, resources, and connections to companies that have good jobs have had to all shift to virtual platforms. So obviously that's required a lot of flexibility, creativity, and resilience amongst a range of community partners that we're working with. So at the core of our work then is we our partnerships with companies to identify the skills they need, and then supporting them to collaborate with educators, workforce programs, economic development organizations, and community organizations to innovate approaches that fill open positions, but that also build a talent pipeline long term. Most of our work happens within industry sector partnerships, which I think a lot of people are becoming familiar with. You'll hear from a manufacturing sector partnership in a moment. But we coordinate partnerships within manufacturing, tech, and healthcare, and our role is really to convene and facilitate. So to kind of wrap up, our work is driven obviously by the demand for specific skills. So we routinely compile, analyze, and share data with our partners. And we're very intentional about vetting the information with our company partners themselves. So for instance, later this week, we'll be convening about 10 IT leaders with a higher ed partner to review a tech talent survey that we collaborated with the Right Board on. To review that data, frankly, within the lens that the impact that COVID has had on the skills we need now, the high demand occupations, and how might we see the acceleration of implementing automation and other technology-based tools for business. How is that going to change the pace and the nature of the talent that we need in tech? And that conversation, for instance, will inform the direction of our tech sector partnership in the coming months. So just to finish up, Team NEO's Aligning Opportunities report and Misaligned Opportunities reports have frankly been a godsend for us. As Jacob said, we've been collaborating now for, wow, it has been a number of years. We love the burning glass data that Team NEO is now becoming very proficient at using, because it helps us better understand the actual skills that are needed and the gap in the actual skills and credentials. It's an expensive tool, so we appreciate the value that Team NEO brings. And, in the early days, we actually paid a consultant independently to generate similar reports. So I could go on, but I'll talk a little more about our partnerships across the region. I know I've taken my time, I believe.
No, that's great. Thank you, Sue. And I mean, you did hit on something that for those of you in attendance at our Aligning Opportunities rollout, Joe Fuller from Harvard really touched on what COVID has done to the acceleration of skills, trends that he projected would take 5 to 7 years to really emerge and change. We're seeing that happen in 6 or so months now. So it's a different world. And the irony is, to your point about data, we probably need data more than we ever have, and it's hard to get in the short term. So a lot of us are learning on the fly in this situation. So thank you. Adam Snyder, same question for you. Would love for the group to hear a little more about what you're doing as it relates to Workforce Connect and manufacturing, specifically in Cuyahoga County, and some of the efforts that you've put into place.
Great. Thanks, Jacob. And thanks for a couple of great cue ups from Goren and Sue as well. So my name is Adam. I lead as Jacob said, I lead the Workforce Connect manufacturing sector partnership in Cuyahoga County as a part of the Magnet team. And the intersection of aligning opportunities and my work starts both in origin and in content. So a couple of years ago, when the idea of sector partnership in Cuyahoga County and the Workforce Connect mode was kind of brought to fruition, Team NEO was a part of the funders group that had that conversation, and obviously aligning opportunities helps to reinforce the origins of those 3 sector partnerships in in-demand industries in manufacturing, healthcare, and IT in our county. And then conceptually, the other place where I feel like there's great alignment with Team NEO and aligning opportunities is in the demand-driven nature of the conversation. So sector partnership as a model is basically set on the foundation of employer-owned, employer-led, which is the core of my work, having just jumped into the workforce space about 1.5 years ago to lead this effort from the employer side, from private industry. It's near and dear to how we operate within the sector partnership to make sure that the vision that we're pursuing, the strategies that we are implementing, the tactics we do on a day-to-day basis are driven by the thoughts and passions and needs of the employer. And in our case, we've got 30 to 40 employers engaged in either the steering and strategy level of this down through to the tactical stuff. And so when we talk about the alignment, both with the workforce community and with aligning opportunities in general, it's nearly explicit because aligning opportunities is representative of the things that the employers on an individual basis are articulating in an aggregated way. But then also, as we talk about misaligned opportunities, as the employers in the manufacturing space in Cuyahoga County have set their strategies over the last 1.5 years, the underlying reality of African Americans being underrepresented in manufacturing, as Jacob pointed out, and other underrepresented and historically underserved populations, the manufacturers have not just embraced that as a component of the work, but have really taken that out front on, this is really a core strategy, a core component of our strategies that can help drive a completely different looking top of our funnel for talent pipeline. If we can figure out how to create great partnerships with organizations like Urban League and community organizations, and how do we leverage existing resources to tap into those communities and build trust with the leaders and the organizations and those populations, then it's a systemic change for our region and for the sector. And so our work really centers around how do we leverage and accentuate existing resources and find out what they need in order to help them do more of that work. And for manufacturing, a lot of that ends up being similar to what Sue said in her first 2 steps around awareness and engagement, because manufacturing in general happens in places where people don't see it when they're growing up or when they're walking around their community. You don't see into even if you live by a manufacturing facility or drive by it, you don't see into it a lot of times. So making sure that we're helping our partners advocate and proselytize about how great the opportunities are in manufacturing to drive family sustaining wages, how great the cultures are and the job quality is in manufacturing, really becomes a passionate part of our work. And we've been lucky enough to have employers that are super passionate about this work. A great example is the reentry pilot that we were set to kick off in March, April. COVID completely shifted how we were going to be able to deliver the technical training and the workforce readiness. But first cohort in June, and now second cohort actually started this week. It's a great example. We have a dozen employers that are a part of the recruitment and the delivery of that content and are committed to interviewing and hiring. And ultimately are excited by how the start of that strategy to really focus on reentry was an intersection of an acknowledgement that our manufacturing workforce is underrepresented with African American friends, and the reentry population is overrepresented by African Americans. So this is a great way for manufacturing to do something that's a great confluence of beneficial to the community, capitalize on talent that is out there and is motivated, and our partners can help us bring in, and also an opportunity for manufacturing to do something that will continue to create positive momentum and awareness in the community for future efforts. And as Sue mentioned, the ability to drive the use of data to continue to refine those strategies. We used it very heavily at the beginning to set our strategies, and continue to use data to make sure that we're still well aligned with the broader community beyond the dozens of employers that are driving the strategy, and also to continue to reinforce for our partners that we're headed in the right trajectory.
Thanks, Adam. Perfect. Goren, maybe we go back to you now, and really hitting on the issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and peeling the onion back a little more. Can you speak specifically to some of the initiatives at the Urban League of Greater Cleveland that are helping to drive DE&I related causes? And also, something that both Sue and Adam touched on, Goren, is this awareness issue. And part of these conversations that we've had, particularly with young people, relate back to you have to be able to see yourself in these opportunities. You have to see someone who embodies you and embodies the characteristics of yourself as a young person to understand opportunity. So maybe how that plays a role in thinking about things like manufacturing careers and other opportunities in the region.
Absolutely. And I want to touch a little bit more on what both Sue and Adam mentioned with the, acceleration of skills. Okay. Let's put that in the vein of collaboration, right? So we're all about social equity and empowerment. So let me put on that lens for a second and really drill down what we do, and how we operate when we think of diversity, equity and inclusion. All right. We're collaboration, as I mentioned, is in our DNA. So we're operating on a legacy of trust here. All right. And we have to cultivate talent pipelines and refer candidates to employers, while we're working on both sides of the aisle. So both the supply side and demand side has a tremendous amount of trust in us to guide us. So we operate a little bit as an advocate, a connector, a convener, a facilitator, a program innovator, whatever it takes. So the talent pipelines, just to be a little bit more clear, they're expecting us to meet them wherever they are and address, whatever barriers are in place. And sometimes we have to go a little bit above and beyond to do that, whether it's, a transportation issue, whether it's a childcare issue, and now since COVID-19, we're finding, that those needs are a little bit greater. Okay, we're dealing, like I said, not with the average chronically unemployed. We're dealing with someone who is relocated back to the greater Cleveland area, who has, a little bit of college, some skill sets that have been in the marketplace. We're dealing with high school grads, college grads that are in the marketplace looking and in need for help. All right, so we have to put that category now stretch it out to the underrepresented, the underemployed. All right, so it's not just entry level jobs that we're pushing for. We're pushing for equitable representation and opportunities for people to actually advance when they get into organizations, and the talent is here. So the talent, they're looking for ultimately higher wages and sustainable income. The employers are trusting us to condition and coach these job applicants and get them prepared for work environments. And that could mean different things, Jacob. That could mean opportunities to expose job applicants, whether they're in high school, college, shadowing work that's being done, and a lot of that we've transitioned to do that virtually now. But these in-demand workforce sectors are where the jobs are going to be. So I want to be clear. It's not about entry-level jobs anymore. It's about creating talent pipelines for career pathways in these high-demand workforce sectors like manufacturing, like tech, like healthcare, where the wages are going to be able to sustain a family and a community longer. So the employers are trusting us to condition job seekers with certain skills, reinforce the soft skills, the positive attitudes, the what it takes to operate in a group effectively and contribute to an organization, because this actually leads to higher long-term retention. And it's not just about acquisition anymore. It's what can I do? Help me get to a point, Urban League, where it's beyond the 90 days and I can actually start moving the needle with my operation, what I have going on. So I'm always looking at the social equity and empowerment lens, but I'm really also cognizant of the needs to really match skills up. Okay, so our training really goes a little bit beyond and above with soft skills. All right, because we feel from hearing our employer partners discuss how this is needed, that is necessary for retention. They have to be comfortable with a work environment. They have to be comfortable with working in groups. They have to understand what's expected of them. And we're asking our employer partners. I go back to the coaching and conditioning from my own childhood, coming from one parent who was an engineer working in manufacturing and the other one was a teacher. Okay, we got drilled every day with what was expected of us, and we would always hear things like your actions speak louder than words. So be accountable for your actions, put some skin in the game. We're drilling that into everyone that comes through the door at the Urban League, and they understand it. We also strongly believe that every problem has a solution. You just have to kind of think about it. So there's really no barrier that can't be addressed. Okay, you can get to the path where you want to be eventually with a little assistance. But we are saying this does take some creative collaboration on both ends. We need to actually work closely with employers to condition. And I always use the word condition because in all of our training, I don't think we can get away from athletics and sports, and I'm filled with analogies on that. But
no, that's great.
Conditioning. All right,
Yeah,
so perfect. That's what I really want to emphasize. It all starts, Jacob, really with a conversation and an idea. All right, and that's how it all starts.
That's great. Thanks, Goren. And I think embedded in your comments is a consciousness to make that explicit effort. So, Sue, going to you, could you talk in a little more depth about some of the DEI-related initiatives that ConxusNEO is taking on, and maybe even how those have changed due to COVID?
Sure. Well, again, starting with data, and sort of telling the truth, I think, as Goren said initially in some of his comments. I mean, quite honestly, Greater Akron performs rather poorly compared to its peer cities in this regard. And, you know, for instance, for every $100 a white resident earns in Greater Akron, a Black resident earns $52.26. I could go on. But the bottom line is we need to expose the information, share the information, which we're doing. And we're in the process with our Elevate Greater Akron partners to articulate a business case for why DE&I efforts are good business, frankly. It's not just the right thing to do, but it's a good business decision. And so, you know, we know that about 75% of all the jobs people are secured with some kind of warm referral. And quite honestly, that doesn't really happen in the Black community. And so we have to be intentional about how we shape our outreach efforts, build trust, I think, as maybe Adam might have mentioned, in the community, position Black leaders to actually articulate the message. Those have all been really important. And you know, I'd be really remiss if I didn't recognize the fact that two of my colleagues from the Greater Akron Chamber are in the meeting today. And in fact, our data guru, Brian Anderson, is here. Brian, literally, could you take like 30 seconds, just high level, the data that we've been able to collect? I mean, what's really driving our collective efforts in Greater Akron around this, because the data is just so stark. Do you have a data point or two to share?
Specific data points. I mean, I think you already covered some of the foundation that we're looking at from publicly available data to show the magnitude of the disparities, right? And that sort of sets the foundation of our work and establishes DE&I as one of our top priorities. I think some of the work that we're doing to try to connect minority and women-owned businesses and entrepreneurs to resources requires us to have a good list of businesses, right? To know who's out there operating, competing in different industries. And at the beginning of the year, we didn't have that business directory. And I think that was one of the big focuses for our work this year through all the different initiatives that we had to build and improve that business directory. And that should help us expand our reach and hopefully drive those outcomes.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I mean, the other thing that we're doing a ton of work around within our industry sector partnerships right now is incubating ideas like what Akron Children's Hospital did last year to launch Career Launch. And it's an internal upskilling and professional development program specific to people of color to move them from entry-level, lower-paying positions into credentialed positions to advance their career and their earnings. So full tuition paid, support for all kinds of things like books, equipment, as well as support for transportation and childcare while they're going to training. And they had their first cohort last year. They stopped it a bit during COVID. It's now started up again. And this same program is available to community residents as well. And you know, we're excited to highlight Career Launch at our upcoming Align event, because it's just a great example of how a business can be intentional about also providing mentors to employees that are going through this process. And I think Goren mentioned the importance of mentors, and I can't agree with you more. So the last thing I'll just mention is that right before the stay-at-home order, together with the Chamber and about 25 other organizations, we launched a job and training fair in the Bookdale cluster neighborhood in Akron, predominantly Black neighborhood. And we were successful in bringing 20 employers and predominantly a Black participant base into the event, which provided that initial awareness of the high demand industries and occupations, where the good and promising jobs are, where you can get training and education to position yourself for these occupations and careers if you need it, and tap into wraparound services as well. So we had organizations there in addition to the companies. Of course, COVID hit, and we've shifted to a virtual platform called Brazen with our partners. We've done 2 events, and I'm happy to say that the majority of the participants in both of those events were Black. Most of them had a GED or high school equivalent. A good number of them had a 2-year degree, but the bottom line is over half of those that attended in both of those events, well over half, are in some form of follow-up with the companies. And we're anxious to get some of the outcomes in terms of hiring soon. But it's all about being intentional, and it's all about positioning the leaders in the community to share the information, to build trust, and to increase our outreach efforts over time, so that we can, as Goren was saying, it's not just about any job, it's about the jobs that, even if they don't pay $15 at least to start, they at least have a career pathway. And we're working with companies that are committed to that professional development that I mentioned as an example that Akron Children's has started. So we're excited about continuing to build that initiative.
That's great. Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Brian. And I can certainly attest to the fact that Elevate Greater Akron's strategy has been extremely intentional about thinking through DEI-related issues as it was implemented, and has really been a thought leader and a thought partner in some of those issues. Adam, again, last but not least, can you speak directly to some of the DEI-related initiatives that you're undertaking through Workforce Connect? And I would also say, I know we're a few minutes past 9:45, we'll probably go a little closer to 10. But we will have time for a question or two. So if folks do have questions, please do put those in the chat box. Adam? Oh, you're muted, Adam.
Sorry, I will be efficient talking about a topic that I would love to talk about for much longer, but hit a couple of high points. Our employers, being in manufacturing, being a fairly analytical industry, we've had a number of great moments where just the data, the aggregate data about underrepresented populations drove initial conversations around strategies. And then also tapping in, we've gotten a lot of feedback of, this is an emotionally charged topic. This is a one that evokes passion with the people that want to pursue DEI strategies. So the couple highlights in the last year and a half, the majority of our manufacturing leadership team companies participated in a D&I assessment process that GCP runs every year, which then drove some great conversations around where do those companies aggregated and manufacturing in general stand in best practices identified in that space. And also helped to solidify the manufacturer's desire to take some specific action as a group. So the first one of those is the development of an equity and inclusion scholarship program, where the manufacturers are both contributing funding for scholarship dollars, but also are really passionate around things like programming and leadership development and networking and building social capital for future leaders in manufacturing from an African-American population. So that we're working with a fantastic steering committee. The manufacturers essentially said, we want to pull in thought leaders from our community, from the Urban League, from the county, from the President's Council, and some of the organizations that really can help us steer recruitment, methodology, application, and screening methods that will help tease out the best opportunities for us to support. And actually, all of these conversations are spurring a bit of a thirst to understand more about racial equity. And even prior to the conversations getting really explicit in the national spectrum, we had the manufacturers saying, how can we learn more about this? This isn't the learnings around systemic racism and racial equity is not something that I've necessarily been fully exposed to. So a great example, at the end of September, we had 14 of our manufacturing leaders. We did a private groundwater session from the Racial Equity Institute, and the manufacturing leaders got exposed to some of the history of systemic racism and implicit bias, and then having a private conversation with a group that's been together setting strategy and working on action items also allowed for a really great conversation around where is each organization and what can we do together that would have an impact, and what are we doing individually on a topic where historically you don't necessarily get a dozen CEOs talking about how this work has impacted what we're working on in the sector partnership and within their organizations. And coming out of that, got even more feedback of, we want to go deeper on this. That was a good taste and a good discussion, and talking about how do we continue to educate both our leaders and their organizations.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks, Adam. Adam, I'm going to stick with you for a second, then go back to Sue and then to Goren. If you had 30 or so seconds to let the economic development community on this call today, part of this discussion, now how they can plug into the work. I know the three well enough to know there's no pride of ownership, that you are collaborative and willing to work with a host of partners throughout the region. What would your advice be for how they can think about your work and how they might get plugged into it if they're interested?
Great. I think my advice to partners in economic development is very similar to my advice to employers. If you want to have an impact, it ends up being a function of really deep relationships. If you're not currently engaged deeply with an organization in your community, and they exist in every county across the footprint, I see names from many counties within Northeast Ohio on the roster today. Getting deep in collaboration and understanding and partnership with an organization that is mission aligned and is accomplishing the things that you want to accomplish, that collaboration and that intersection at the seams is where really innovative work ends up happening. And so that same message to employers of, you know what, I just haven't done a great job filling my pipeline with folks that look like this, or that sound like this, or that have these types of skills or backgrounds. You don't have to invent that wheel. There's somebody that's either doing that or is close to it, and your participation can add value to what they're doing.
That's great. Thank you, Adam. Sue?
Yeah, building on what Adam said, I mean, with the deep relationships, it's also about a strategic approach to talent development. There are lots of great programs out there, including our public workforce system, that are a little more transactional. I think with the sector partnership work, we offer an opportunity to work with an individual company who's maybe investing lots of money in automation, and they're trying to figure out how that's going to impact their talent needs and where are they going to source that talent. So we collaborate with Greg Kramer, who's on the call from the chamber, to bring all the right partners to the table to develop a comprehensive strategy with the company. So assisting in some of that BRE work is something that we've done routinely, and it seems to work quite well. And I would say on these larger systemic issues, like systemic racism, like what we've been talking about here lately, I mean, we're a resource to help bring, as Adam said, thought leaders to the table in partnership with the chambers, to really think through what does the data say and how might we bring a full range of partners to the table to develop a full range of initiatives to begin to move the dial in the right direction.
That's great, Sue. And Goren?
I agree with both Adam and Sue, and I just want to add that you don't have to look that far for things that you can do to contribute towards this effort, of DE&I. Sometimes the answers are right in front of you, whether it's getting involved on a leadership level, okay, around thought leadership, okay, or going deeper into the trenches with how you are handling, your talent pipelines and creating real equity, okay, and inclusion practices to create equity, and while you implement diversity goals. So it's not going to be done overnight. We understand it's a process, but again, it's a collaborative effort. All right. So someone is trying something. I'm a big believer in disruption leading to innovation. Okay. It's okay to actually feel challenged and feel like you don't know, how to navigate, and seek out, examples of best practices. But, at the end of the day, everybody wants the same thing, to be able to enjoy their work and be successful at what they do. So I think that we can all move the needle towards that.
That's great. Thanks, Goren. We are getting close to being right at about 10 o'clock. If anyone wants to unmute and ask a quick question, we probably have time for one. I didn't see any in the chat box. If not, Renee, I don't know if you have any additional closing comments, but once again, I just would really like to thank Goren, Sue, and Adam for this conversation this morning. When we talk about some of these issues internally, we admit we're on our own journey to better understand how we can be impactful towards issues, particularly as it relates to DE&I. Misaligned opportunity is a piece, and a piece that we think we can inform the conversation, but there's a lot more, and there are a lot of partners like the three of you doing just great work in the community, and the ability to leverage that, I think it's going to be so impactful. So thank you to the three of you for being a part of this conversation this morning. Renee, any final comments from you?
So yes, just a few things. Are there any questions out there by any of the participants really quick, if you'd like to unmute or put it in the chat box really quick before we begin to wrap up here? All right, excellent. Really quickly, I wanted to put a plug out for our next node meeting, which will be December 1st at the same time. And then also, I am going to put a plug in here for our Lido roundup this week at 4 o'clock. The topic will include the Moody's post-election economic projections and an upcoming smart manufacturing cluster event, and continuing discussion on port financing projects. So please, if you can register, Kendra has just put the registration for our weekly Lido roundup call at 4 o'clock today. It is now at 9:58. And I am not seeing any questions here at this time. And I think we are at time. So I want to thank our panelists, Goren, Adam, Sue. Yes, I wanted to, Steve just put in the chat that the meeting tomorrow is at 4 o'clock. So make sure if you're able, it is tomorrow at 4 o'clock rather than today. Sorry about that. All right. Thank you to our participants who have joined this discussion. Hopefully there's been some great takeaways and thoughts to consider the challenges in our skill and supply demand workforce. We are all working together, hopefully, to move our region forward to address these pressing issues. And we look forward to all of you joining. Thank you so much, Jacob, for moderating and leading this great and esteemed panel. Until we meet again, you've got another minute back. Take care.
Thanks all. Have a great day.